Today's version of What's in Your Garage comes back down to the Shire, and we're with long-term club member David Miller. Good morning, David. How long have you been a member of the club?
I joined the club in 1975.
Wow.
Continuous member ever since.
Jolly good. Well, the club only opened in 72, so you have had a long run. Well done. And what is this beautiful Mercedes?
Well, it's my 190 SL. I've had the car since December 1960. It was somewhat of a Christmas present, I suppose. At that time I was just approaching 19 years of age, so it was very much unexpected, and I've owned the car, driven the car many thousands of miles ever since.
Well, you wouldn't believe it to look at it. I believe you've been across the Nullarbor in this, is that right?
Yes, in November 1970 I drove to Perth. Not the coolest time of the year. In those days the bitumen road didn't exist between Gukla and Ceduna. It was a pretty rough old track, and it was full of big bull dust holes. The 190 SL, cautiously driven, probably around about 35-40 miles an hour at the most. It handled it quite well and gave remarkable fuel consumption that day. Probably one of the few times it was driven slowly.
Wow. So, and have you done much work to the car over the years?
I've maintained the car largely myself, with help from a couple of expert mates over the years. The engine was rebuilt back in the late 70s. It had a piston failure at about 1977-78 or so. It had that stage about 170,000 miles on it, I think. It was rebuilt then, has not been touched since. The cylinder head has been offered several times, overhauled several times. The last time about 5-6 years back. The rest of the car, brakes and everything else has largely been maintained by myself.
Well, look, I mean, as your viewers can probably see, we've got a nice bright sunny day, but the paintwork is just beautiful. What colour is this, David?
That's 334 blue. That's its original colour. I had the car repainted for its first time in 2008. Had the chrome done. I took it apart myself, but it wasn't a restoration. It was bodywork, chrome and trim. Process did the trim, Axel Olaroche did the paint on it. I took it apart, I put it back together again.
Beautiful. And what about the interior?
Well, that's the original trim. It's vinyl. It's exactly the same material as the original material that John Pisani was able to source. We put new cushions in it. We didn't repaint the dashboard, incidentally. That dashboard is still original. I put a new steering wheel on it at the time, but not much else was touched other than the paint, the trim and the chrome.
All right, we'll have a better look inside when we take the roof off, and we'll also have a look under the bonnet. Back in one moment.